In this video, I'll go over everything you need to know regarding the driving on the tracks in the Lightning Cup. I'm going over the shroomless lines, the shortcuts and driving strats, and the coin routes. Well, at least on the first 3 tracks. N64 Rainbow doesn't have any shortcuts or cool strats, and there aren't many coins to go over, so I'll only be going over the shroomless lines on that track. But without further ado, let's start Giviner, bud. Just before getting started, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I can guarantee you won't regret it. Also, make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed the video and leave a comment because I'll probably respond to it. Yeehaw, bud! Tock Lock is a really fun track to drive in my opinion. When the race begins, you immediately want to begin a left drift. This can be a little tough when starting in first, but you want to soft drift as you go around the turn, then hold wide on the straight and release a super mini turbo into a right hop and trick off the ramp. As you land, perform a right slide into a left drift. Soft drift initially, then hold wide to position yourself toward the hand trick. Release your mini turbo just before it, then get 2 tricks off the hands. On this next straight, you can either easily drive straight and trick off the ramp, or you can perform 2 mini turbos with the second one being into a mini turbo trick. To my knowledge, both are around the same speed, but the double mini turbo method could reduce the chances of you getting spammed at the beginning. Anyway, trick off the ramp and begin a right drift as soon as you land. Hold wide on the following straight, and a bit before the next ramp, release your mini turbo into a left slide, into a right slide, into a trick off the ramp. Begin a right drift as soon as you land and release a super mini turbo on the following straight. From here, it's all about nailing tricks. For this first ramp, I'd suggest tricking off the tiny bump over the ramp rather than the ramp itself. At this point, just trick off the multiple ramps on this section freely, but try not to steer too frequently here, thus driving as straight as possible. As you trick off the final ramp, begin a right drift as soon as you land. Release a mini turbo over the tiny gap into a left drift. You want to hold wide on the straight before the shortcut, and as you approach this diamond, begin the soft drift. Release your ultra mini turbo into a left hop, into a right hop, into a trick, into a left drift. Then release your mini turbo on the final straight and trick off the cog if you can. While my exit wasn't the greatest, this is generally how you want to approach the ending shortcut, specifically on lap 1. And there you go! It's just another day in the office! So summarizing it all up, as the race begins, charge up a super mini turbo. Release it on the next straight and trick off the ramp. Release a mini turbo before the hands and trick off both of them. Afterwards, drive straight or chain 2 mini turbos, then trick off the ramp. Release another mini turbo on the following straight and trick off the ramp. Charge up and release a super mini turbo on the upcoming big straight and trick off every possible ramp on that straight. Begin a right drift after the final ramp and release a mini turbo over the gap into a left drift. Charge up an ultra mini turbo while aligning for the shortcut, release it onto the shortcut, trick off the ramp and perform a mini turbo on the final straight, and you're giving her like it's your job! Now, on laps 2 and 3, you'll probably be taking the left path here. This is what it looks like on lap 2, although you could aim for a mini turbo trick off the ramp rather than a mini turbo before tricking. And this is what it looks like on lap 3, including how you should go about performing a mini turbo trick. Regarding the ending shortcut, while you can take it on lap 2, it is pretty risky, especially if you weren't already in first from the get-go. Either way, you could take the shortcut the same way you would on lap 1 on a good pace, and get an easy trick off the cog. This shortcut is much easier on lap 3, but the risk factor is still there since it's at the very end of the race. But here's how you do it. If you notice an opportunity to pull it off, you could gain a spot or 2 at the very end. While you can only collect up to 9 coins while driving tight, this is a pretty good track for coin collecting. You have 2 big coin bunches and a ton of 1-coiners all lined up. There are the 4 wide coins on both the left and right path, the coins on the glider section, and the 4 wide coins on the final turn. So yeah, in combination with the numerous amounts of 1-coiners, you got options. Anyway, that's how it's done on Tock Lock. So let's start giving her on Piranha Plant Slide. Piranha Plant Slide is a pretty cool track and a fun one to drive. When the race begins, you immediately want to position yourself towards the right coin and trick off the ramp. Just stay in a straight line and trick off the following ramp and perform a left slide before tricking off the next ramp. Begin a left drift as soon as you land and release a mini turbo on the following straight immediately into a right drift. When taking the middle path, you'll go over a tiny bump. While in the air, release your mini turbo just before landing into a left slide, then trick off the ramp. Begin a left drift as soon as you land and stay tight. Release a super mini turbo into a right hop and position yourself toward the right ramp. Trick off the ramp and begin a left drift before going off the coin block. Charge up a super mini turbo and release it over the tiny gap into a right drift. Release another super mini turbo on the downhill straight. Stay on the middle water stream, and as you trick off the ramp, transition to the left water stream, then trick off the ramp and begin a left drift as soon as you land. Release a super mini turbo on the following straight and just drive forward. While you can do some mini turbo shenanigans, they're almost never worth going for here. Anyway, trick off the glider ramp and begin a right drift as soon as as you land back on the track. Release a mini turbo after the turn, immediately into a left drift. You want to soft drift as much as you can, then hold wide on the final straight and release an ultra mini turbo into a right hop as soon as you get it. And boom! Talk about a yeehaw moment. So altogether, stay to the right at the start of the race and trick off the 3 beginning ramps. Then chain 2 mini turbos and trick off the middle path ramp. Charge up a super mini turbo around the following turn and position yourself toward the right ramp. Trick off the ramp, then charge up a super mini turbo, which you'll release into another super mini turbo on the downhill. Stay in the middle, trick off the ramp, then steer to the left. Trick off the following ramp and begin a left drift as soon as you land. Release a super mini turbo on the following straight and just drive forward, no mini turbo shenanigans. From there, trick off the glider ramp, and as you land, edge out a mini turbo into an ultra mini turbo, and you're just big time Giviner, bud. While I said you shouldn't perform any mini turbos around the glider section, you can release a super mini turbo off the glider. However, it is a pretty risky strat to go for, and I wouldn't recommend going for it online unless you're running and you literally never fail it. And of course, the ending shortcut. Shroom through it and release a super mini turbo on the final straight. It's as simple as that, so you'll be giving her full throttle. Anyways, this track is very generous for coins. Not only can you easily collect more than 10 coins while driving tight, but you have quite a few other options if you need them. You have the coins you aim for when tricking off the left ramp, the 4 wide coins on the underwater turn, and the 2 wide coins on the right before the glider. This is probably a top track when it comes to coins, so you should be covered if you're in need of some cash money. But with that, we're done with Piranha Plant Slide, so let's get her going on Grumble Volcano. Grumble Volcano is one of my favorite tracks in the game. The start of the race, at least on lap 1, is pretty simple. Just trick off the ramp and drive straight, picking up one of the coins along the way. Shortly after entering the cave, begin a left drift and charge up a mini turbo. Release it after the turn, immediately into a right drift. Charge up a super mini turbo and release it as soon as you're on the following straight. Position yourself to the right and trick off the ramp, then begin a right drift immediately. For almost the entirety of these next few mini turbos, you want to soft drift. Chain 2 mini turbos before the big turn, then charge up an ultra mini turbo. Release it as soon as you get it, immediately into a left drift. At this point, you don't have to worry too much about soft drifting. Anyway, as the boost from your ultra mini turbo is about to run out, release your super mini turbo into a right drift. Release your mini turbo into a neutral or left hop over this little patch of off-road and perform a left slide as you land until you trick off the ramp. Then trick off the glider ramp. Aim for the top path and dive down so you land just before going off the ramp, then begin a right drift. On this turn, you want to release a super mini turbo into another right drift, then perform a mini turbo trick off the ramp. A little after landing, begin a left drift. Begin drifting tight as you're about to touch the first coin, then release your mini turbo into a right hop, eventually into a right drift. Trick off the ramp and begin another right drift immediately. Charge up a mini turbo before the final ramp, and as you approach it, release your mini turbo into a left hop, into a left slide, into a trick off the ramp. Begin a right drift and do the same thing for the next ramp, and edge out one last mini turbo before entering the cave once again. Boom! That's just how it is, bud! So adding it all up, trick off the beginning ramp, drive straight, then charge up and release a mini turbo on the first turn. Charge up a super mini turbo which you'll release on the following straight, then trick off the ramp. From here, chain 2 mini turbos into an ultra mini turbo, into a super mini turbo after the ultra mini turbo boost runs out. Release a mini turbo and hop over the tiny patch of off-road, then trick off the ramp and the glider ramp. Position yourself toward the boost ramp and begin a right drift as you land. Chain a super mini turbo into a mini turbo trick on this big turn, then release another mini turbo into a trick on the final turn. Perform some mini turbos before the next 2 ramps and a mini turbo afterwards, and it's just another day in the office there, bud. There are 2 shortcuts worth going over on this track. The first one is pretty straightforward, the shroom spot. You can optimize it best by drifting off the boost ramp and releasing an ultra mini turbo before hopping off the off-road and back on the track. This is a pretty fun one. And there's also the ending shortcut, which you can easily make with a shroom, but you can also make it shroomless. Although it's really risky, and considering you'll only have access to it going into the literal final stretch of the race, you probably shouldn't take it in any situation unless you need it to win for yourself or your team. This is another solid track for coin collecting. You shouldn't have many problems collecting up to 10 coins while driving tight. While other valuable options are scarce, they are there if necessary. You have the 3 wide coins at the beginning, the 2 coins on the first moving platform, the 3 coins on the wide path, and the 2 coins on the second moving platform. Those are at least the coins worth mentioning, but either way, you should be good to go. Anyway, we're done with Grumble Volcano, so let's get the job done on N64 Rainbow Road. Just like Mount Wario, I'll be separating this track's coverage into the 3 individual sections. And like I said earlier, I'll also only go over the shroomless lines here. So without further ado, let's start giving her, bud. At the start of this section, you just want to drive straight and aim for the boost panels. As you approach the third though, you should drive straight if you're in the pack since you could draft. But if you're in first, you should perform a mini turbo trick off the glider as I do here, and you'll have a slightly better chance at keeping first for a bit longer. Either way, aim for the upper end of the boost rings and land on the right, just after the anti-gravity strip, and begin a right drift as soon as you land. You want to charge up an ultra mini turbo while aiming for a couple coins that aren't too far outside of your line. Collecting 4 is solid here. Anyway, release your ultra mini turbo on the following straight. After that, just drive straight for the rest of the section and trick off the waves. You should shake your controller to guarantee the tricks here. Position yourself to the left as you approach section 2. So this is a pretty easy section, so I don't have much to summarize here, but here's how you want to drive the full section 1 in real time. The only thing to consider driving wise is your position at the beginning, which should determine whether you just drive forward behind first or perform a mini turbo trick off the glider, which would be in first. Anyway, I'll let this roll out and I'll catch you at section 2. A little before the section line, begin a left drift and release a mini turbo into a right slide on the following straight. While you can release a super mini turbo here, it can be pretty precise and isn't much faster to my knowledge. Anyway, on the next turn, you want to chain 2 ultra mini turbos. As a result, you're going to be doing a ton of soft drifting. You should release your first ultra mini turbo shortly after collecting the first of the 2 coins on this turn. And of course, release it into a right drift. At the end of the anti-gravity section, release your ultra mini turbo into a left hop. Position yourself to the right of the wavy straight and shake your controller to get as many tricks as possible. While you should aim for a trick on the following turn if possible, if it isn't possible, you can perform a mini turbo here. Anyway, begin a left drift as you go over the anti-gravity strip. Soft drift where you can to charge up an ultra mini turbo, which you'll release into a right hop on the following straight. To summarize this section, you want to release a mini turbo on the first straight, and on the big turn, you want to chain 2 ultra mini turbos. On the wavy straight, shake your controller to get as many tricks as you can, and release a mini turbo on the next turn if you can't get another trick. From here, charge up and release an ultra mini turbo on the following straight, and you're good to go. Section 3 isn't anything too fancy, as it's the entirety of this track. You want to begin a right drift a bit before the next turn, then before the following turn, release your mini turbo immediately into a left drift. You're going to charge up a super mini turbo, which you can release freely once you're on the next straight. About midway through the straight, begin a right drift. You want to begin drifting early to give yourself as much reasonable time as possible to charge up an ultra mini turbo. So soft drift where you can and release your ultra mini turbo into a left hop on the big straight. Position yourself to the left, and a bit before the next turn, begin a left drift. As soon as you charge up a super mini turbo, release it into another left drift and edge out 1 more super mini turbo before the final turn. Release it into a right drift, go over the boost panel, and release your super mini turbo by low gliding. You can do some vector shenanigans as well, but yeah, you're finished with N64 Rainbow Road. On section 3, you want to chain a mini turbo into a super mini turbo on the first 2 turns. On the next big turn, you want to charge up an ultra mini turbo, which you'll release on the big straight. Chain 2 super mini turbos on the final big turn. Begin a right drift and drive over the boost panel. Release your super mini turbo in low glider fashion. And just like that, we're finished with the driving in the Lightning Cup. Yeehaw, bud! I hope you got something out of this video. If you did, I'd really appreciate it if you'd like the video and subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, stay tuned for next week when I go over the strategies on each of these tracks. We're nearly 2/3 of the way through this series, and I'm really happy to hear that you guys are vibing with this. Once again, I really appreciate the support. It means a lot to me, so thank you so much. But until next time, thank you so much for watching. Have yourselves a fantastic day, and keep on giving her, bud.